Welcome to Conflict and War Studies channel. Today we will be talking on the European security, which has become one of the most debated topics in recent months. And it has also been one of the hot topics in recent weeks, especially after the disclosure of the United States national security strategy. My guest is Professor Haldun Yalçınkaya. He is an international relations professor in one of the most reputable universities in Ankara. He is the founder of Bodrum Institute, which is a higher education platform. Haldun Yalçınkaya also lectures in many countries, especially in Europe, and one of his areas of expertise is the security issues. Welcome to the program and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Actually, I am one of the followers of your YouTube channel. So it is really a privilege to be guest at the program. Thank you.
We can maybe start with the general outlook of Europe. Especially after the pandemic period, European economy has suffered severe losses and has not been able to recover yet. And the European economies are not growing. The growth rate is less than 1%. There are political challenges, especially with the influx of refugees, immigrants to Europe. The far-right parties are on the rise. There is a political polarization. And most recently, especially with the President Trump's taking office in the United States, his new approaches and policies towards Europe has raised the tension between the two major powers of the West. The situation in Europe for some people is considered as a crisis situation. How do you see it? Do you think that it is a crisis in Europe?
That's a very difficult question. So there is not any specific answer for that question, but I can analyze the question. So that's the best to keep away from any hard question for always as academics do. Let me be honest, if, as you mentioned during the opening US national security strategy released recently under the Trump administration, and on this strategy, it is very well described that Europe is in crisis, especially as you mentioned, the proportion of the world GDP and the proportion of Europe from the world GDP has been decreasing ever since the Cold War ended from 20% to 14%. So that document stress the decrease, and in near future, that will be lesser than the current situation. And the second issue is migration. And the third issue, necessity of balancing against Russia, as well as necessity of the Ukraine war and the peace in Ukraine war. So interestingly and different from you, that US national security strategy highlights the importance of the far-right parties and necessity of the dominance of the far-right parties in Europe to save Europeans because of the migration issues. And it is different approach. Honestly speaking, the rule-based international order and also the recent decades, the last more than 3 decades, especially in Europe, was telling us that the diversity is something we need to care about. But I think we are at the edge of new era for international relations. So apart from the US national security strategy, which is very consistent from the US perspective, we should admit, because Trump administration needs to raise the interest of the United States as a politician, and the decision makers need to take into account their national interest. But the issue in that perspective, the United States of America has been taking the responsibility, especially the peace in Europe, the end of the Second World War. So if we take into account this 75 or 80 years of period from 1945 onwards, First, we need to take into account the period which we called Cold War until the 1990s, and the second period is from 1990 onwards. So Trump administration wants to open new era for European security beginning from the 2025. So if we look at this 80 years of performance of the United States for securing Europe is highly remarkable and highly successful. Comparing to the previous period of the history. If you take into account the political history, beginning from say 1600s, the 1600s onwards, actually the last period of 80 years is not the big portion of this period. It is really a small portion, maybe 15% of the portion. Most of the period covers wars and also insecurity and also lots of conflicts. So actually from the 1600s until 1945, Europeans were responsible from their security, and it created lots of insecurity not only in Europe but also in the rest of the world. But if we take into account the period after the 1945 onwards, the United States of America were responsible from the Europe security, and the US performance was remarkable because of the fact that we didn't have any war in Europe. Back to the historical realities, it really teaches us that we should be so careful if Europeans are responsible from their security.
It's really an interesting and a different perspective, and I think we will see it because the United States has already decided to reduce its presence in Europe. It also sparked many debates in Europe for the future of NATO. We will come to this point, but I want to continue with the Russia-Ukraine war. As you know, there is now peace negotiations are going on. United States initially proposed a 28-point peace plan. This was rejected by Europeans and Ukraine. After several rounds of negotiations, the plan has become now a 20-point peace plan, which US, Europeans, and Ukraine agreed on, and now it is proposed to Russia. Russian response is awaited. There are several important points in the plan. First one is Ukraine is going to give up from NATO membership plans. In terms of security guarantees, the NATO Article 5-like mechanism will be established for the security of Ukraine against a possible Russian aggression. And thirdly, the territorial concessions. The 20-point peace plan is not disclosed and we don't know the details, and this is the most important part of the plan. It seems to me that Ukraine agrees on some territorial concessions in Donbas. How likely a peace in Ukraine? Do you see it a high possibility?
Let me ask you first. Do you see highly possible?
In my opinion, it totally depends on first the territorial concessions. If Donbas is given to Russia and if Crimea and Donbas are recognized as Russian territory, it is very likely that Russia will agree on it because Russia has already agreed on the, according to some reports, agreed on the Ukraine's EU membership and welcomed the Ukraine's giving up from NATO membership. So most of the issues seems like resolved except the territorial concessions. If they agree on this, I think peace is likely.
Yeah, that's an issue. Actually, you described the technicalities of the possible or probable peace very well. I cannot resist your explanation. But my point for the peace agreement is European approach. And also, in my end, I don't see that European way of looking to the peace, following to peace. is not very productive for the future uh, security environment of the future. Let's put it in that way. In one way or another, the war will be ended. I mean, either side in the war is eager to reach the peace. I think this is something we need to take into account. But the issue, the interlocutors of the peace, I mean, Ukraine and Russia are the parties in the war, and the US is the very important and dominant actor, party for the peace. But Europe is not a party in the peace. So they are just spectators of the peace deal. I think it is very problematic from my end. I'm afraid if we, I mean, the rest of the world cannot manage the peace in Ukraine, especially Europeans, it is a case for Europeans. If they cannot manage the peace to finish all wars, I think that peace might end all peaces in the rest of 21st century. This is lesson learned from the history. And the signs from the Europe for the possible peace Ukraine and the post-Ukraine war period is not promising at all. Actually, these signs are showing militarization of Europe. Actually, it's not starting from the militarization of Europe. Actually, it starts from the moving from the cheap security to expensive security. I mean, for Europe, after the Cold Second World War, the main mechanism was based on cheap security for Europeans because the USA took the responsibility and took the burden on them. So since they are US is giving up this burden sharing and handing over their security expenditures to Europeans, I think Europeans are not so eager to take the responsibility, and they are not ready, I'm afraid. So from that beginning, to answer the question, to describe the situation for the possible peace in Europe, I think Europeans are trying to find a way to convince their societies, communities, their people to spend more money for their security and allocate more sources for securing Europe. In order to convince their societies, their public, they give the signs to use Russia as a buggy or as an enemy of the Europe in the future. I think it is not very productive in terms of peace. It is not very productive for reaching the peaceful environment. I mean, if you reach a peace deal, after the peace deal, you shouldn't have any enemy. But
So
for the
this
past,
is
yeah,
you really raised very important point. Now there is a mistrust between Russia and the
yeah,
Europeans. The mistrust started maybe from the early 2000s because the expansion of Russia of NATO towards Russia has led to the mistrust between the parties, and this mistrust has not been resolved, and indeed it has been deepened with the Ukraine issue. The United States strategy for Russia now is to have a strategic stability in Eurasia region, either by making a peace with Ukraine or by freezing the conflict. But the US expects both from Russia and the Europeans to have a stability. In that case, US, as we know, that once Europeans to take the responsibility for the security of Europe, which is very costly, as you said, for Europeans. Now the issue, maybe we can discuss, is Russia a real threat to Europe? Many Europeans believe that it is a threat, but Russian officials always state that Russia does not have any intention to offend to Europe. They want to have good relations with Europe. Indeed, before the Ukraine issue, there were some good relations between Russia and European countries. Germany, Italy, they were quite trading partners of Russia. So is Russia a threat to Europe?
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, no matter what in reality Russia is, the European democracies needs to convince their public to spend more money for their securities to describe Russia as an enemy.
There is another debate now. The United States, if withdraws its capabilities from Europe, and if the United States, because United States also sees Europe as a burden for itself, there are arguments that United States should leave NATO. And some people say if US leaves NATO, NATO dissolves, and it may lead to a big security turbulence in Europe. So, can we talk on this?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's very interesting topic. I think more and more in the future we will discuss that issue. Actually, similar discussions we had in the early 1990s after the end of the Cold War. So we will discuss whether NATO was necessary or not, but NATO survived. Actually, NATO, I mean, the military is itself an organization and gigantic mission works perfectly. For US, instead of making NATO dissolved or quitting the NATO membership, there are some other rational choices for US for NATO. I mean, we have partners in NATO from Southeast Asia, including Australia, Oceania. So the partnership programs of NATO and also from the Gulf region and some other Indo-Pacific region, there are partner states, including Japan. I would say instead of quitting the NATO for US, I'm making NATO, although the name is North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but it would easily expand its coverage area of responsibilities to the rest of the world. And the role of the US might decrease in Europe, but also it could be more in the, let's say, in other regions of the world.
So the expansion of NATO, you said that the expansion of NATO not only in Eurasia region, but to the rest of the world, like
Yeah.
involving Japan or Australia, so on. That
The,
has never been.
Africa plan, you
But
know.
if that happens, then NATO will lose its characteristics, values, and aims, goals, and so on. So NATO established partnerships with countries, as you say, from very different parts of the world, but has never had a decision to expand NATO to those areas. And in the last US security strategy, US explicitly says that NATO should not expand any further because
But I think, yeah,
it
it
also
covers expansion in Europe,
yes, it says expansion in Europe because they haven't even
not in
considered the expansion of NATO to other regions because the expansion also triggers reaction from other regions. And I remember one time when Putin came to power, he offered NATO Russian NATO membership. And this was rejected by NATO because this would completely change the characteristics of NATO. In my opinion, that NATO at least can survive for 10 more years minimum because even if US leaves it, the Europeans need NATO. NATO is uniting the European countries as a military organization. It has some robust systems, established functioning systems. Europeans need NATO, but the United States fear is that the demographic change in United Kingdom and France, the two nuclear powers of NATO, and the United States says, and I listened some statements from high officials of US saying that United Kingdom and France will no longer be European countries if the trend goes in this way.
Yes.
as a result of
Public,
the
because of the
demographic
yeah, yeah.
in the next 20 years. And this is their fear. And this is also, I think, one of the reasons why people have started discussing the irrelevance or relevance of NATO.
Yeah, maybe let's go back to the history and military history this time. Throughout the history, the military organizations, armies, which can adapt itself or evolve to the new circumstances and take the which can take the lessons from the new developments and adapt itself, they could survive. The others cannot survive. Actually, it's a kind of test for NATO as a military organization. Of course, it's an alliances system, but as a military organization, if NATO can adapt itself to the new environment, NATO can survive.
I
But
think,
if, yeah,
yes, important point, but I have to say that NATO is a defense organization by definition. It has military dimension and political dimension. Don't suspect that NATO cannot adapt or can adapt to the changes militarily. This is not a problem for NATO to adapt itself militarily, but the
but
political part.
speed of adaptation matters, I guess.
Yes, but political adaptation is the problem.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay. So,
So I mean, as experts on security issues, unfortunately, we will have lots of works to do in the future. Unfortunately, I wish we couldn't find any subject to work on it. Unfortunately, we will find many.
yes, you're right. I fully agree with this, and there is an increasing uh, possibility of even a world war people are discussing nowadays. So maybe we can talk about the future of Europe. In my opinion, I can see two major scenarios for Europe. One is to align with the United States new security strategy and to have a good relationship or at least a dialogue, a new dialogue with Russia and to reach a strategic stability in Europe. This is the first scenario. And the second one is an increasing competition with Russia and independence from the United States, strengthening European Union or maybe enlarging European Union and establishing a more independent European defense mechanism or system.
Yeah,
Which
I agree. I agree, but I think Europe can be rational, and I wish Europe would not describe Russia full enemy during the post-Ukraine war period. I wish they could manage to describe Russia as Turkey does. Turkey has been in rivalry Russia for centuries, but now we manage, from 1930s onwards, we managed to compartmentalize our relations. I think Turkish model for how to deal with Russia could be a good sample for Europe in the future. We'll see.
Okay, there are also differences among the Europeans. Some European countries are in favor of establishing good relations with Russia, but there are countries like UK, for example, which wants to continue with the competition relationship with Russia. And it is sometimes really hard to understand why some
It's also
European countries.
understandable. From historical perspective, I can easily understand.
Okay, we can finish now.
Okay, thank you very much.
First
It
of
is
all,
my pleasure.
thank you very much once again for accepting to join me on this topic. It's really an important contribution to the channel. I hope to see you again on our future discussions.
Hopefully. Thank you for having me.